to ask me, and very kind of Denby's to host us. I actually live in Derbyshire, and it might surprise you to know that we also produce sparkling wine in the Peak District. But having tasted both, I now know why Denby's is about the biggest wine producer in the UK, and Derbyshire, well, it isn't. Now, I'm a fan of history, so the first thing I did thinking about today was go back to some source material for the creation of what was then the Surrey Hills AONB, and it shows nothing is really new. In 1955, what was then the Manchester Guardian, the good old days of the Guardian, reported that there were moves to set up an AONB to protect the area from development, but that campaigners were fighting to get more money from the government for protected landscapes, and anyway they were being threatened by housing and ugly plans for power lines. And just a bit to the south, the same report noted that officials had decided the South Downs were not worth protecting anymore because farming had damaged the landscape and there wasn't any value in it at all. Now, those pressures are clearly all familiar today, but we would probably look back to 1955 and 75 years ago when the Act was passed as a time before the collapse of biodiversity, when roads were free of traffic and development hadn't scarred the horizon. So scientists might say it all depends what your baseline is. Where do you start from? How do you measure change? And what do you count as success? So when it comes to land and nature and people's involvement and the culture of the use of it in farming, it's always tempting to look back to a baseline long ago and then feel very miserable about what we've lost. And there's a very energetic and wonderful school of nature writing, the shops are full of it, if you look, that's really a kind of lament. Our bookshelves are full of beautifully written texts of mourning for a damaged England. And that mood too is echoed in a lot of environmental campaigning, which can be very pessimistic. And if you love nature and landscapes, there is a lot to be pessimistic about. But 75 years on from that amazing act, which created the first national parks, and soon after the Surrey Hills AONB, and now National Landscape, I think we can be optimistic. We need to look forward, celebrate that act, and work out what can be done, not ignoring all the challenges of nature and biodiversity and the way we live in the world today, but starting by being thankful for what we've got, partly because of that visionary legislation, and then focusing on what we can achieve, and that's what today's event is about. Because whilst it's simplistic to say, it's also true that it's perfectly possible for our generation and the one which comes after to leave landscapes like this in a better condition than they are today, more beautiful, full of nature, and properly connected to people, open to all. And the good news is we basically do know what to do. It's really a question of will and funding and mentality of not giving up, not surrendering. And it's because people in the 40s and 50s didn't surrender that so much of England and the south of England is still magical. And you'll know that one of the joys of London is you don't have to go far on a southwestern or southern train to find yourself somewhere wild and beautiful. And Surrey is still very green, despite the intense pressures that even in the 50s they didn't see coming. So the job now isn't just to hang on to what we've got, to have conservation, it's to make it much better. And that's the ambition behind this new title of National Landscapes. And there's also the ambition that lay behind the review I was involved in a few years ago. I was part of a great panel, and we had a team. It was a collective effort, it wasn't just me. But with the help of lots of people, including some here today, we produced a report at what was an optimistic moment. It seemed like change was going to come. Now, without getting political, 4, maybe 5 Prime Ministers later, 6 Secretaries of State later, goodness knows how many Chancellor of the Exchequer later, this is a good chance to ask, what did we achieve and what happens next? Well, the answer is we haven't achieved enough. But there is one very bright spot, and that points the way forward, and that's the enthusiasm of national landscapes like this to come together as a common cause with varied local needs and histories. And that matters a lot, and it's one of the big things we talked about in the review. Something in the culture of the landscape movement, if there is such a thing, over the past few decades, hasn't always seen its national potential, its absolutely fundamental importance to making our country a wonderful place. And other causes, equally good ones, are better older at making the case for national support. Sport, for instance. UK sport spends substantially more funding the Olympic diving team alone this year, heading to Paris in July, than DEFRA does the whole of England's national landscapes. Now, I could list all the numbers. It's not that diving is a bad thing. It's just that if you make the case for something wonderful together, you really can achieve success. You can achieve a lot more. So we should ask, how can our vital landscapes get the same sort of support, both public and financial? Now, we've heard a little bit about the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which I'm a trustee of, and I chair the Midlands and East, and that's central England, everything north of London, so I'm not responsible for the grant you've just heard about today. But it's a sign of what we can do. We've given, I think, 11.5 million in total to all sorts of projects across the Surrey Hills landscape since the start of the fund nearly 30 years ago. We're about to do a big programme to fund protected landscapes, and we want really exciting partnerships, people working together, working with farming, working with everybody to think about nature and people, so that's coming out soon. So we're there to give our support, but of course we can't do it all. Landscapes have to do it too, and it's really good to see what's happening here, but overall, quite often there is a collective ambition to match that immense public desire to protect and restore nature and beauty. Now, the day I began that review we heard a bit about, I did something really simple. I drew two overlapping circles like you do at school in Venn diagrams, and I wrote nature in one and people in the other. And all the way through, we tried to stick to that. Because we don't, as a society, face a choice between nature or human life and economic success. We've got to work for both. We've got to work for landscapes that have people living in them, farming them. They're not wildlife reserves away from human beings. And the future of nature depends on people understanding, liking it, and protecting it. Just as people can't survive without a healthy natural environment to support life. And that's the jewel drop of our protected landscapes. And it's something they're better placed to do than anything else in our country. Now, we shouldn't be ground down by some of the woes I mentioned earlier about the collapse of biodiversity. We should stand up for the absolute importance of the cause and the centrality of landscapes like this in making sure it happens. And then we can be confident in changing things to achieve what we want and not regret decline. I've tried really hard since the review to think about how we bring people together. There's a lot of awful news in the world, conflict and division, and a lot of it on social media too. But we need to bring people together because there is a common cause, different aspects of it, different opinions, but a joint thing. People who care about nature and the countryside do sometimes take sides and are encouraged to exacerbate their internal division. There are sort of wilding dreamers and artistic naturalists against muddy booties realists who make a living from the land. And both groups, if you look at social media, will complain a lot about being misunderstood by the other. And sometimes they'll complain about protected landscapes and find themselves stuck in the middle. But all the time that's happening, they fail to spot that the profound threat to the countryside comes from those who don't really care about what happens in it at all. Luckily, lots of us, all of us here tonight, do care. They cared 75 years ago when the law we now remember was passed. So luckily, wonderful places such as the Surrey Hills are part of our lives, and with your work, always will be. Now, you'll know Keats and his poems better than me, but he finished writing his famous poem, Endymion, I think about a mile from where we are tonight. And he wrote a very famous opening line, "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams, and health, and quiet breathing." And he ended, "And now, at once, adventuresome, I send my herald, thought into the wilderness. There let its trumpet blow, and quickly dress my uncertain path with green, that I may speed easily onwards, through flowers and weed." And it's a magnificent thing that the landscape he loved is still the one, at its core, that we can see outside today. And we need to make sure we build on that and continue and strengthen it. So thank you very much for coming. Good luck with all of this. It's very exciting to hear about the funding for the new scheme. I hope it's the start of further funding and ambition to come. And soon I think we can have another glass of wine. That'll be welcome too.